The cabin lights glowed softly, painting the narrow airplane aisle in a warm golden hue. The steady hum of the engines mixed with the quiet rustle of papers and the gentle clinking of ice against plastic cups. In seat 17B sat a man of 38, calm and focused, the kind of person most passengers overlooked. His tablet rested neatly on the tray table, its screen filled with a research paper covered in highlights and notes. He read with the quiet focus of someone used to heavy thinking at 30,000 feet. Beside him, a woman shifted impatiently. Her auburn curls were perfectly styled, her gold gown shimmered under the cabin light, and her designer handbag occupied most of the shared armrest. Her perfume, sharp and floral, filled the confined air. Every few minutes she sighed loudly, as if every moment on this flight was an insult to her dignity. When the flight attendant passed by offering water, she waved her hand dismissively. "No, thank you. Though maybe clean the tray tables once in a while," she added loudly enough for several rows to hear. The man looked up, offered a polite nod, but stayed silent. He returned to his notes, stylus gliding across the screen. Then light turbulence rippled through the cabin, rattling the glasses and making passengers grip their armrests. A splash of champagne spilled onto the woman's dress. Her gasp cut through the quiet air. "For heaven's sake," she snapped, turning toward him. "Could you not bump the seat every 5 seconds?" He blinked, puzzled. "I didn't touch it." She gave him a sharp look, scanning him from head to toe. "Of course you did. These seats don't move themselves." He calmly reached into his pocket and offered her a napkin. "Here, this might help." Her lips curved into a smirk that wasn't quite a smile. "Oh, please keep your pity. I can handle a spill." She pulled a tissue from her bag and dabbed at her gown with irritated precision. The plane steadied. The man turned back to his tablet, hoping for peace. But silence never lasts long when pride is bruised. "You know," she said finally, her voice slicing through the steady hum, "you should really be more careful. People like you never seem to understand personal space." He looked up calmly. "People like me?" She leaned back, crossing her arms. "You know what I mean. People who think they belong anywhere they sit. No offense, but it's obvious you don't fly much." He studied her face for a second. "None taken." She seemed almost disappointed by his calmness. "So what do you do? Something creative?" Her tone dripped with sarcasm. "I teach," he replied simply. Her eyebrows arched, a mocking smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, a teacher. That's nice. Must be fulfilling, though I suppose it doesn't exactly pay for first-class seats, does it?" A passenger across the aisle glanced over, sensing the tension. The man noticed too, but stayed composed, folding his tablet cover neatly. "I find the work rewarding enough," he said. She scoffed softly. "Sure, rewarding. Meanwhile, real professionals are up there sipping wine behind the curtain. Guess we all make our choices." He didn't respond. Her words didn't sting. They only revealed her need to feel superior, the fragile pride behind her sharp tone. A few minutes passed as the attendants rolled food carts down the aisle, the faint scent of reheated pasta filling the air. When the cart reached their row, the attendant smiled politely. "Chicken or pasta, sir?" "Pasta, please." "And for you, ma'am?" The woman barely looked up. "I'll have the chicken, and make sure it's actually warm this time." The attendant's smile faltered but stayed professional. "Of course." When she walked away, the woman sighed dramatically. "Service these days, unbelievable." The man turned to the window. Outside, the clouds stretched endlessly below, glowing white under the sun. It was peaceful except for the voice beside him that refused to quiet. "So you teach," she said again. "What subject?" He turned slightly, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "Science." She tilted her head, unimpressed. "Science, huh? And that's what, high school? University?" Her laugh was soft but mocking. "No offense, but you don't look like a professor." He raised an eyebrow. "What do professors look like?" "You know," she said, waving her hand vaguely. "Tweed jackets, glasses, that sort of thing. Not whatever this is." She gestured toward his simple black t-shirt and jeans. "You look like someone who fixes computers at the mall." He smiled faintly. "Maybe I should try that next." She mistook his humor for agreement. "Well, at least you're honest. Most people try to act more important than they are. I respect that." The irony nearly made him laugh, but he simply nodded and turned back to his tablet. The words blurred slightly as he caught his reflection in the window. Calm eyes, steady breath. and the quiet patience of someone who'd faced far worse insults in quieter rooms. For a while, only the low hum of the engines and the soft rattle of trays filled the air. But her voice soon broke the calm again, sharp, restless, searching for dominance. "You know what I can't stand?" she said to no one in particular. "People who think education makes them better than everyone else." "You can't teach common sense," he didn't respond. She pressed on, emboldened by his silence. "My husband runs a company. He hires people like you all the time. Smart on paper, useless in reality." He turned his head slowly, not angry, just tired. "That's an interesting perspective." "Oh, it's not perspective," she said proudly. "It's experience. You'd be amazed how many educated people can't hold a normal conversation without sounding like a textbook." A ripple of discomfort passed through nearby seats. Someone coughed deliberately, but she ignored it, feeding off the attention. "No offense, of course," she added with a sugary tone. "I'm sure you're very good at whatever it is you teach." He stared at her quietly for a moment, then said softly, "You might be surprised who my students are." Her brows lifted, curious, but defensive. "Oh, why are they famous or something?" He didn't answer. Instead, he closed his tablet, resting his hands in his lap. The hum of the engines filled the space between them. Outside, the sky had turned violet with dusk. The golden shimmer of her gown caught the fading light, scattering it across the cabin wall. For the first time, her confidence wavered. Maybe she wondered if she'd gone too far. A soft chime signaled the seatbelt sign. The captain's calm voice announced mild turbulence ahead. Emma gripped the armrest instantly, her knuckles white. The man glanced at her, noticing her fear. "It's just a change in air pressure," he said gently. "Perfectly normal." She didn't reply, her gaze locked on the seat in front of her. The plane shuddered slightly, then steadied again. When she finally exhaled, her voice was smaller, stripped of arrogance. "I hate flying." He said nothing, turning his eyes back to the window. Their reflections hung side by side, hers anxious, his calm. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was thick with something unspoken. She didn't apologize, and he didn't expect her to. But somewhere in that quiet, the balance shifted. The cabin lights dimmed further. Passengers began to settle into uneasy rest. But the air between seat 17A and 17B felt charged, alive with unspoken challenge and tension. He closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to center himself. Something told him the conversation wasn't over. The turbulence had faded, but the storm between them had not. The air felt heavier now. Emma crossed her arms tightly, her jaw set in the stubborn defiance that only pride could build. The man took a sip of water, unbothered, unwilling to engage, but silence was never her strength. "So, Professor," she said suddenly, her voice sharp again, "since you're such an expert on air pressure, maybe you can explain why we keep shaking every 10 minutes. Is the pilot still learning?" Without looking up, he replied calmly, "It's caused by wind shear, changes in air density as we pass through temperature shifts." Her laugh was brittle. "Right. I'm sure you read that on Wikipedia." He turned to her then, his tone steady but firm. "Actually, I've written about it." That shut her up for a moment, but only briefly. "Oh, come on," she said, rolling her eyes. "Don't tell me you're one of those people who think knowledge solves everything. Sometimes experience matters more than education." He nodded lightly. "Sometimes it does, though ideally one should guide the other." She huffed, looking away, the overhead light glinting off her earrings. Her irritation grew with every calm word he spoke. She was used to arguments, not composure, conflict, not control. The plane dipped slightly again, and a ripple of nervous laughter spread through the rows. Emma's hand tightened around the armrest, but this time she stayed silent. Moments later, the flight attendant approached with a polite smile. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. "I think I've seen one of your lectures online. Are you the professor who spoke about behavioral responses under pressure?" Emma's head snapped toward him, her expression frozen in disbelief. The protagonist's eyes flickered with faint amusement. "That sounds like me," he said. "Oh, wow," the flight attendant breathed. "I watched one of your lectures in college. You talked about emotional intelligence during crisis management. It really stuck with me." He smiled warmly. "I'm glad it helped." Emma blinked, her fingers tightening around her drink. "You give lectures?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Occasionally," he said. "Mostly research and teaching these days. The attendant nodded respectfully. You changed the way I handle stress. I can't believe I'm serving you coffee right now. It's just a regular flight, he replied kindly. The attendant laughed softly, embarrassed, and moved on. Then the murmurs began. Whispers rippled through the nearby seats, soft at first, then spreading. A man 2 rows ahead looked up from his phone, eyes widening as recognition dawned. Emma noticed the shift instantly. Who are you exactly? She asked. Her tone caught somewhere between curiosity and unease. He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched until she spoke again, the sharpness in her voice now dulled by uncertainty. You said you're a professor. Of what exactly? Aerodynamics and behavioral psychology, he replied. Her mouth parted slightly. That's oddly specific. He met her gaze calmly. They overlap more than you'd think. Her brow furrowed. How? He leaned back, eyes steady. Both deal with pressure. How people react to turbulence, whether in the air or in conversation. His words landed with deliberate precision. She looked away first. The confidence that had carried her through the flight began to crumble. Across the aisle, a young woman whispered to her friend, That's him. I knew it. He's the professor who gave that viral talk on cognitive bias. Her friend's eyes widened. Seriously? The one with millions of views? Emma's shoulders stiffened. She adjusted her gown, straightened her back, as if posture alone could restore her authority. The protagonist stayed silent. He wasn't interested in attention, but the energy in the cabin had shifted. People who hadn't noticed him before now looked at him with quiet respect. Emma cleared her throat. Well, she said, forcing a small laugh, I suppose that's impressive. He inclined his head slightly. Thank you, she hesitated. I just didn't expect someone like you to be so accomplished. He raised an eyebrow. Someone like me? She fumbled. I just mean you're very casual. Most professors I've met are, more formal. Different how? He asked. Polished. Reserved. You seem ordinary. He smiled faintly. That's the thing about assumptions. They usually reveal more about the person making them. Her lips parted, but no words came. For the first time since takeoff, she had no clever retort. The flight attendant returned, holding another cup. Professor, she said with a grin, the captain wanted to tell you he's a big fan of your work. He's used some of your studies in pilot training programs. Emma froze mid-motion, her hand hovering over her bag. The protagonist accepted the drink with quiet grace. That's very kind, he said. Please thank him for me. We will, the attendant replied before moving down the aisle. A low hum of conversation spread through the cabin again. Emma's cheeks flushed pink. Her posture softened, the confidence she had clung to now fading fast. She reached for her glass of water, but her hand trembled slightly. So you're well known? She managed after a moment. Not really, he said, just in certain circles. She nodded quickly, too quickly. Right, I mean, everyone's good at something. I'm sure you're great at yours. He turned to her, his tone calm but edged with quiet meaning. You don't have to minimize it. It's okay to admit when you misjudge someone, she bristled. I didn't misjudge you. I just didn't know who you were. There's a difference, he said softly. One comes from not knowing. The other comes from assuming you already do. Her mouth opened, then closed again. The color deepened in her face. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its edge. I suppose I might have been a bit blunt earlier. A bit, he echoed gently, a trace of humor in his tone. The cabin fell quiet once more. He returned to his tablet, scrolling calmly, while Emma stared straight ahead, caught somewhere between embarrassment and self-reflection. Outside, the clouds drifted below them, glowing softly in the fading light. The plane began its slow descent through a stretch of thin mist. Emma shifted in her seat, restless. The silence, once her weapon, now worked against her. After a long pause, she spoke again, her voice smaller, almost sincere. You must deal with a lot of people like me. He didn't look up. Not as often as you'd think. Most people are more curious than cruel. She nodded faintly. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I know, he said quietly. You were just trying to feel important. A soft chime sounded overhead. The captain's calm voice filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be experiencing a bit of turbulence as we approach the jet stream. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Emma's hand gripped the armrest instantly, The plane shuddered, overhead bins rattling softly. Her breath caught, fear flashing through her eyes. And this time he didn't need to explain the science. His calm presence was enough. The protagonist spoke calmly, his voice steady and reassuring. "Focus on your breathing. In through the nose, count to 4, then out." Emma hesitated but followed his advice. Slowly, her shoulders began to relax. The turbulence eased, and when the seatbelt sign clicked off again, she exhaled in relief. She turned slightly toward him, pride softening into gratitude. "Thank you." "You're welcome," he replied gently. For a while, silence settled between them, but it wasn't the tense silence from before. It carried reflection, humility, and quiet awareness. Moments later, the attendant returned with a polite smile. "Professor, the captain asked if you'd meet him after landing. He's a big admirer of your work." Emma turned toward the window, but her reflection betrayed her emotions, shock, disbelief, and a hint of regret. The professor simply nodded. "Of course." The attendant left, and Emma stared straight ahead, silent. The plane leveled, gliding smoothly through open air. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, a steady rhythm that felt almost like a drum roll, marking the moment between pride and consequence. Passengers resumed quiet conversations, yet glances kept drifting toward seat 17B. Recognition spread subtly, like a wave that couldn't be ignored. Emma sat rigid, pretending to scroll through her phone, though her gaze kept flicking toward him. The confidence she had once worn like armor now seemed brittle, fragile. He noticed but didn't react. No smugness, no satisfaction, only calm focus as he reviewed the notes on his tablet. Still, his stillness carried weight. What once made him invisible now drew silent respect from everyone around. When the attendant came to collect trays, she stopped by their row with a bright smile. "Professor, the captain said your paper on flight psychology helped train his new team last year. He wanted to thank you personally." Several passengers looked up, intrigued. A man 2 rows back murmured, "I've read that study." The words weren't loud, but they carried. Emma froze mid-motion. The professor inclined his head modestly. "That's very kind of him." The attendant smiled. "He also mentioned your book. I watched your interview. You made something so complex feel human." He returned her smile. "That's always the goal." She moved on, leaving a ripple of quiet admiration in her wake. Emma adjusted her seatbelt, hands trembling slightly. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then whispered, "You must think I'm awful." He looked up, his voice calm. "I think you're human." "That's generous," she said bitterly. "Not really. Most cruelty begins with misunderstanding." She gave a faint, humorless laugh. "You sound like one of those motivational podcasts." "Maybe," he said, "but it doesn't make it untrue." The engines deepened in tone as the plane began its descent through gray clouds. The seatbelt light pinged again. Passengers straightened up, preparing for landing. Through the window, city lights shimmered below like scattered stars. Emma spoke softly, almost to herself. "I wasn't trying to be cruel. She stopped, her throat tightening. "I've spent my life around people who make me feel small, so I guess I learned to strike first." He turned to her, his gaze steady but kind. "Then maybe you've been fighting the wrong opponents." She opened her mouth to respond, but the intercom interrupted. "Flight attendants, please prepare for landing." The moment dissolved into the mechanical hum of descent. Emma glanced around. Passengers were still whispering about him. He felt it but didn't bask in it. Fame, he knew, was just another kind of turbulence, unsteady and fleeting. As the plane dropped lower, Emma leaned toward him, her voice small. "You're not going to tell anyone what I said earlier, are you?" He looked at her, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Why would I?" "Well, people were listening. Someone might have filmed it. I don't want to look like an idiot." He paused before speaking. "Emma," he said softly, using her name for the first time. Her eyes widened. "The only person who decides whether you look foolish is you," he said quietly. "What you do next matters more than what you said before." Her throat tightened. "I thank you." He nodded and turned toward the window. Below them, the city shimmered like a web of gold and silver veins stretching endlessly across the dark horizon. The landing gear descended with a soft thud. Runway lights glowed in perfect rows, leading them home to solid ground. When the wheels touched down, a ripple of applause broke out, an instinctive gesture from weary travelers relieved to have arrived safely. Emma clapped once, hesitant and unsure, her palms barely meeting. Beside her, the professor sat still, a faint smile softening his expression. As the seatbelt sign chimed off, passengers began to stand, stretching and reaching for their bags. The professor waited patiently, hands folded while Emma fumbled with her carry-on. "You really don't seem angry," she said quietly. "I'm not," he replied. "Anger requires expectation. I didn't expect kindness from you." He paused, then added gently, "That's not an insult. It's an observation." She blinked, trying to understand the calm behind his words. "You make it sound like I'm a case study." He tilted his head slightly. "Everyone is in their own way." A soft laugh escaped her, small, genuine, almost apologetic. "You really are a professor." "I really am." The line of passengers began moving forward. The flight attendant appeared once more, holding something in her hand. "Professor," she said warmly, "the captain asked me to give you this. He said he's honored to have had you on board." She handed him a small envelope embossed with the airline's logo. Inside was a handwritten note. "Your work inspires our crew every day. Thank you for reminding us that knowledge and humility keep us in the sky." Emma caught a glimpse of the message as he folded it carefully. The words struck deeper than any scolding could. She lowered her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "I really was awful, wasn't I?" He glanced at her. "You were mistaken. There's a difference." The aisle began to move again as passengers filed out toward the open door. A cool rush of air swept through the cabin, carrying the scent of jet fuel and rain-soaked tarmac. Emma stood beside him, awkward and quiet. "I hope you don't think I'm beyond saving," she murmured. He smiled, kind but firm. "No one is, but understanding only matters if it changes something." She nodded slowly, letting his words settle. Ahead, laughter and conversation spilled from the terminal. When it was their turn, the flight attendant at the exit gave a respectful nod. "It was an honor, Professor." "Likewise," he replied, stepping forward. Emma lingered behind, watching how others greeted him, with respect, admiration, gratitude. The memory of how she had treated him gnawed at her. She caught up just before the jet bridge opened into the terminal. "Hey," she said softly, her voice trembling. "For what it's worth, I'll try to be better." He looked at her, expression unreadable but gentle. Then maybe the flight wasn't wasted. Before she could respond, the captain appeared at the end of the bridge, smiling broadly. "Professor, I wanted to thank you in person. Your research helped my trainees stay calm during simulations. You've changed how we teach." Emma froze beside him, her earlier arrogance gone completely. The captain extended his hand, and the professor shook it warmly. "I'm glad to hear it helped," he said. Nearby passengers began to whisper again. "That's him," someone murmured. "The professor," they mentioned. A few phones tilted upward, cameras flashing discreetly. Emma stepped back, turning her face away, her cheeks burning. The captain clapped the professor on the shoulder. "It's an honor, sir." When he turned to speak to the crew, Emma looked at the professor one last time. "Guess you really do teach people how to stay calm under pressure," she said. He met her gaze evenly. "Pressure reveals character. Yours still has time to change." Her lips parted, but no words came. He offered a polite nod and walked toward the terminal, disappearing into the moving tide of passengers, leaving her standing in the echo of her own realization.